traffic on this main road is heading for Sao Paulo, the largest city, the richest city in Brazil. "25 kilometers out from the city center, Sao Paulo's built-up area has already started. It's not perhaps what you would expect the approach to the country's wealthiest city to look like. But it's not here among the slums on the edge of the city that the wealth of Sao Paulo is to be seen. To find that, you must carry on down the main road for another 25 kilometers towards the city center. Half an hour or so after the first roadside shacks, the view is transformed. This zone of offices, hotels and luxury flats stretches for 8 kilometers across the center of the city. As far as industry and commerce are concerned, Sao Paulo is Brazil's #1 city. Most big companies operating in the country, Brazilian and foreign, have their headquarters here. In many ways, Brazil is ruled from Sao Paulo, a city of sharp contrasts between rich and poor. One person who sees something of both sides of Sao Paulo, rich and poor, is 12-year-old Mauro de Souza. Mauro lives on the edge of Sao Paulo and spends his weekends and school holidays cleaning shoes in the city center. He does it for pocket money and in a modest way to help out with the family budget.
Estrada eu não conheço, não. Mas eu não trabalho com tinta. Tinta estraga o couro de sapato.
Mauro lives in a working-class district in what's called the periferia, the periphery or edge of the city. Untidy areas like this now encircle Sao Paulo. They've grown very quickly, according to no particular plan. It's in this kind of district that Mauro's family have their home. Brazilian families are usually larger than ours, but Mauro's is large even for Brazil. It took Mauro quite some time to get through all their names.
Começando dos menores, Alessandro.
Starting with the youngest, there's Alessandro, Janicio, Marcinha, Mauro, Cassio,
Maria, Geraldo, Afonso,
Maria, Geraldo, Alfonso, Anna, Maria my mother, and Mauro my father. The two Mauros are me and my father, and the two Marias my sister and my mother.
Dois Mauro, eu e meu pai, Maria, minha irmã e minha mãe.
During the school holidays, Mauro makes an early start before setting off for the city center.
I got the shoe shining box and some of the stuff that goes with it from my older brothers. They both used to be shoe shiners when they were younger. One's a lorry driver now, and the other works in a shop. So there are 3 people in the family working, including my father.
Ele é quem manda a gente amar. Ele é caboclo, ele é irmão. Ele é bonito de coração.
From Mauro's street, it's about an hour's bus ride to the city center.
Ele é quem manda a gente amar. Eu dei pra ele meu Panamá.
Sao Paulo's skyscrapers stand at the center of a vast built-up area with a population of around 12 million. The size of the city today is to a large extent the result of immigrants arriving from Europe, Asia, and other parts of Brazil. From the bus terminal, Mauro heads for one of the pedestrian precincts in the central shopping area.
I work on a couple of blocks in the street where there are people sitting down. Once there are people sitting down, you've got customers. Talking to the customer is good for business. If I get them into a conversation, I can usually push the price up. I charge about 30 pence, and I give half of what I make to my mother.
Once the shoe cleaning's over, there's a bit of friendly bargaining before the price is fixed. The customer wants to knock the price down, but Mauro, already something of a sharp operator at 12 years old, won't budge and gets the price he wants.
To be honest, my parents aren't too keen on me spending time doing this, but I don't want to keep asking them for pocket money. I know how difficult the situation is at home. A lot of children do odd jobs to help the family out. Anyway, I like working because I think it will make things easier when I get a real job later on.
Mauro's home is in a street occupied by working-class families who've lived in Sao Paulo for some time. Opposite is a district where people have moved in more recently, where the houses are typical of the way the city is growing nowadays. It's an area of slums, and slums are spreading fast around the edge of Sao Paulo. Mauro told us about what's going on opposite his home.
These slums I'm talking about, one of them is being built now. The people making shacks are not supposed to be there on that bit of land. The council say they're going to throw them off, but they've got nowhere else to live. First of all, the people turn up with picks and shovels and clear the land. Everybody in the family helps, the children and the women too.
Pedro Lemos is one of the people building a shack opposite Mauro's home. Pedro is a factory worker, but in Sao Paulo nowadays, just because you can earn regular wages doesn't mean you can find a proper place to live. This is the only house Pedro can afford, a wooden shack he has built himself on land that doesn't belong to him. It was his only option.
Bom, eu tô fazendo aqui porque eu tenho 4 filhos, não posso pagar aluguel, eu trabalho na Matarazzo. Então, o que a gente ganha é pouco. Então, a gente tem que...
What I'm doing here is because I've got 4 children, and I can't afford to pay rent from the money I make at the factory where I work. I earn very little, and it won't cover what you have to pay for a proper place to live. If you go for 1 or 2 months without paying rent, they throw you out. So I'm making this shack simply for somewhere to live. I started building this place at 6 o'clock this morning. Until now, me and my family have been living cramped up in a tiny room at my wife's aunt's place. I was thinking of building a shack in her backyard, but there's not enough space. If the council comes along and tells me I'm not supposed to be here, and I've got to get out, I'll tell them I've got a wife and 4 kids. And how do they expect me to pay rent out of my wages? We have to fight for our lives. We wouldn't be doing something like this if we didn't have to. If you can't pay rent, this is what you have to do.
What's going on here, across the street from Mauro, happens hundreds of times a day in Sao Paulo. The moment one shack goes up, others will quickly follow. One makeshift dwelling becomes a permanent slum. Yet another to add to the many already on the edge of the city. Without services like proper drainage, conditions deteriorate very quickly as a slum gets larger. The streets turn into a mess of rubbish and filthy water. Figures from the Sao Paulo Council show that 3 out of every 10 dwellings in the city are below what the council calls acceptable standards. In those substandard houses live 4 million people, close to 1/3 of Sao Paulo's population. Half the city's houses have no connection to the main sewerage system. Such has been the growth of Sao Paulo's slums that the city council has been forced to start a scheme to build homes for at least some of the city's poorest people. To keep the rent as low as possible, the new houses are very basic, no more than shells of concrete blocks. It's up to the new occupiers to improve them once they've moved in. All that may sound rough and ready, but at least the new housing areas are properly planned. Electricity is already installed before the people move in. In a slum, it may be years before the electricity supply arrives. Each home has its own water tank connected to the main water supply. In a slum, large numbers of families often share a single tap set up in the street. But here, outside each house, is a large sink for doing the washing. And inside, a bathroom properly connected to the main drainage system. This area of new houses will shortly be occupied by some of the people currently living in the slum next door to it. The family living at number 219 New World Street were one of the first to get themselves on the long waiting list for the new houses. They described the difference between the new homes and the place they're living in now.
A diferença grande, por causa que negócio dessas tábuas, muito perigoso, né?
There's a big difference. These old places are very dangerous. They're made of wood, and it wouldn't take more than a spark to burn the whole place down. There are 10 of us in here with hardly any room to move. It's really very dangerous.
Fizemos bastante campanha pedindo ao prefeito fazer essas casinhas.
We put a lot of pressure on the council to get our request through for one of those houses. We succeeded, and the houses are finished, but we're still waiting for a key. They said we'd get it last week. Then they said today or tomorrow. But I don't think they're going to give it to us today at all. Everybody here wants one. There are people who don't, but in this neighborhood, everybody wants one. Everybody.
Some people in Sao Paulo are waiting and hoping for the day when they will have the most basic shelter. In another part of the city, there are people for whom life is no struggle at all. This is the driveway leading to a new apartment complex at the western edge of the city centre. Nobody is allowed in without being checked and noted by a security guard. The people who live here are not the super rich. They're just fairly well-off members of Sao Paulo's middle class. As far as home comforts and possessions are concerned, this must be fairly close to having everything you need. father of the family has an important position with one of the banks in the middle of the city.
Isso se via da janela, cantinho de céu e o Redentor.
At this level of Sao Paulo society, nearly every household employs a maid. The average wage for a maid is £8 a week. This family has 2 maids. Apart from supervising the running of the home, the mother has very few domestic chores to look after. The children go to good schools and their parents are paying towards the cost of their education. They have an excellent chance of getting good jobs and will most likely continue to have a high standard of living for the rest of their lives. The people living on the edge of Sao Paulo are only too aware of the wealth that exists in other parts of the city. Their ambition is one day to be better off themselves. Even Mauro's family, whose standard of living is above average for their district, wants to move on somewhere else to a better part of the city. Mauro himself is determined to get on in life. Most evenings during the school holidays, he gets down to some homework after a day's shoe cleaning in the city. What is all the working and studying leading up to?
I want to be an aircraft pilot. In an aeroplane. I intend to study for it. I'm planning to go into a school and learn how to fly. When I'm 16, I'll be able to get into a training school, and by the time I'm 20, I'll be a professional pilot.
And how does he intend to go about this?
By working like I am now, and keeping the money in a savings bank.
But cleaning shoes isn't going to help. Few working-class families can pay for their children to go on studying once they've left school. Mauro, of course, knows this.
Being rich isn't everything in life, but it would be nice. The thing about money is that you don't need to get into debt. If you don't have any money, you're in trouble. The important thing for me is to stay close to my family. If I don't succeed in what I'm aiming to do, I just want to know that my father and my mother are in good health.
In Brazil's #1 city, it is a known fact that the big gap between rich and poor is widening. For those on the edge of the city, the problem now is how to keep up with the most basic everyday needs. The two faces of Sao Paulo are drifting farther and farther apart.
And now, Daytime on 2 continues with a look at life in a rural community in drought-stricken northeast Brazil.
In the northeastern corner of Brazil, 500 kilometers inland from the sea, the sun rises over a landscape that is totally different from any other in the country. This is the heart of Brazil's dry zone, a vast area of territory where the rainfall is low and unreliable. Only a semi-desert kind of natural vegetation survives. This landscape is called Caatinga. Crops can grow here, but every 10 years or so, the rainfall drops way below average and the harvest fails. The dry zone, Brazil's poorest region, becomes a drought zone, and poorer still. Pau-Ferru is a small village in the Caatinga, 100 kilometers from the nearest town. After 2 years of poor rainfall, the village wells have run dry, and many people have given up and moved away. Now the villagers' only source of water is a stagnant pond that built up against the road embankment during the last downpour 6 months ago in February. Carminha da Silva is the eldest daughter of one of the families still pressing on through the drought in Pau-Ferru. Carminha's family use this water for washing, cooking, and drinking. Carminha's brothers are bringing in firewood, the one and only item Pau-Ferru will get from the land this year. During the 40 years or so that Carminha's mother has lived in the dry zone, she's been through 4 big droughts. She is used to long periods of time when there's not enough to eat. This year, she said, the family will make do with beans and rice once a day, goat meat once a fortnight, green vegetables never. The water from the roadside pond has to make do for every domestic purpose. Boiled and mixed with flour, it's all Mrs. De Silva has to give her younger children. The De Silvas have grown accustomed to the harsh place they live in. Illness and death are almost part of everyday life. Mrs. Da Silva is especially tough. We asked her how many children she's had.
Eu tive 15, tem 10 vivos.
I had 15. 10 are still alive.
How did the children die?
Foi, o primeiro deu a disenteria e vomitando.
The first one died of dysentery and vomiting. She was ill for 3 days. There's no doctor here, and I couldn't afford to take her to a doctor. Another girl died too for the same reason. And then a boy. All I could give him was medicine I had left over, but he died too.
When was the worst time Mrs. De Silva can remember?
Eu acho que para mim foi mais agora.
I think it's now. There was a bad time too when I was a child, but now it's even worse because I've got a lot of children and can't afford enough things for them. Food, clothes, medicine for them when they're ill. Wages around here are not enough.
Não tem ganho nesse lugar aqui, não.
We plant the crops every year, but we hardly get anything from the land.
Não faz nada.
Did Mr. De Silva plant crops last year?
Plantei
I did.
feijão, milho,
Beans, corn,
mandioca.
and cassava.
Did it work?
Deu não. Faltou inverno.
No, it didn't. The rains didn't come.
The area affected by the drought is a little larger than Britain. In all this, there is really only one important river, the São Francisco. It rises some distance to the south, where the climate is much wetter, and flows northwards right through the middle of the drought zone. In an area where the vegetation is a dull, monotonous brown, it's hardly surprising that the blue course of a major river should play a special part in the life of the region. The people who live on the banks of the São Francisco consider the river as belonging to them. They call it Old Frank. It's a term of affection for a river that is their means of transport and their source of water for washing, drinking, cooking, and irrigating their crops. In short, Old Frank is life itself. But in recent years, this special relationship between the riverside people and their Old Frank has in several places been totally destroyed. A plan is underway to build 9 dams across the river, most of them in the drought zone. This one is the latest to be finished. It was built at a place called Sobradinho. It is in many ways the most stunning sight ever to appear in the Caatinga, a perfect symbol of the large, expensive development schemes Brazil is so fond of. It cost £366 million. It will eventually supply water for irrigation and is already generating hydroelectricity for the big cities of northeast Brazil. But £366 million wasn't the only price paid for Sobradinho. What was once a section of the São Francisco River is now the largest man-made lake in South America. 75,000 people who used to live by the river have had to abandon their homes. Some of the most thriving riverside communities and some of the richest farmland in the dry zone are now beneath the waters of Lake Sobradinho. As the lake filled up to its final size, the electricity company built 3 new towns at the lake shore to rehouse some of the people who lived by the river. One of them is Nova Casanova. The town is bright, breezy, and pleasant to look at. A tidier place than any of the old riverside settlements it replaces. Mrs. Braga is one of the 5,000 people who were obliged to move from their old home by the river to a new house in Nova Casanova. She lives here now with her husband, João, a farmer. João and his wife are more than happy with their new home, rented from the electricity company. But the rest of the story of their move from the river to Nova Casanova is a disaster. First, what about the compensation João got for his land? The land that was flooded by the electricity company. João explains.
Bom, a indenização da gente foi muito curta, pelo menos a minha.
The compensation they paid to people was very little.
Muito baixa.
Mine was extremely low. I had a small piece of land with 23 fruit trees, coconuts, orange trees, guavas, mangoes and cashews. I had all that on my piece of land.
Tudo tinha dentro dessa rocinha.
And it was all flooded for next to nothing, for £58.
7.300 cruzeiros.
João now has a new piece of land rented to him by the electricity company. It's 10 kilometers outside Nova Casanova, a long way from his home. And there was a problem with the land, too.
Bom, eles falavam que davam.
They said that they would offer a piece of land already cleared and fenced, but nothing like that happened.
Deram 700 cruzeiros e...
All they gave was £5 and 400 meters of wire, and that's not good for anything.
Essa minha, aquela partezinha que nós vinha ali...
The piece of land I have managed to get into shape was cleared and fenced with the help of friends.
The rest of João's new land is on a slope leading down to the lake. It's still in thick bush and covered in stones. And here is the biggest frustration of all. João's land reaches to the lakeside, but the water is virtually useless for irrigation. It's 5 meters below the level of the land it is supposed to irrigate, and cut off from it by the thick bush. Is there anything João can do to lift the water that far?
A não ser com motor, né? Com a máquina.
Only with a pump. A pump is the only way to get anything out of this land. And then I could make a little plantation and grow bananas, sugarcane, pawpaws, or whatever. But I can't afford to buy a pump.
Eu, pelo menos, não posso comprar motor, né?
You see, the banks lend you money to buy that kind of thing. But I'm terrified of that sort of business. Terrified.
Eu estou muito medo desses negócios, né? Estou assombrado. O que eu tenho medo é que...
The reason I'm afraid is that I might not be able to pay back the loan, go broke and end up with no land at all.
E aí, a gente fica com a cara para cima, a gente fica sem a roça, né?
See what I mean?
Não é isso?
Perhaps someone should have bought him a pump. But in a way, João was lucky. At least he and his fellow citizens in Nova Casanova got a new home and new land from the electricity company.
Não arranjar nada. Mas dá volta. Volta. É. De novo, né? Até logo, ó. Zé. Até logo, vou alguém, passe bem.
But 40% of the people who lived by the river got scarcely any compensation at all. And they have been left virtually to fend for themselves, like the people now living in the small village of São Gonçalo, 10 kilometers from the lake shore. São Gonçalo houses 30 families who used to live by the São Francisco River. 8 years ago, they were forcibly removed from their riverside land by the electricity company and left here to put up new homes for themselves, deep inside the Caatinga. Six kilometers outside the village, the electricity company built a concrete water tank fed by water pumped up from underground. But the pump only works part of the time because the company doesn't deliver enough fuel to run it properly. In São Gonçalo, practically all they talk about still is the move from the riverbank and the predicament they have been in for the past 8 years.
Tudo é determinado por Deus. Mas diz o senhor que chamando por Deus... Tudo é determinado por Deus. Claro, eu sei que vamos chamar por Deus agora.
God and their own strength will see them through, they say. There are people in São Gonçalo who are almost obsessed about this disruption to their lives and will never forget it.
Eu morava na margem do Rio de São Francisco. Plantava na terra firme.
I used to live on the banks of the São Francisco River. I used to farm land at the riverside and land on small islands in the river.
Eu tinha água para beber à vontade.
I had plenty of water for drinking, for washing, and for cleaning clothes.
Eu plantava na margem do rio a cana.
I grew sugar cane by the river, cassava, sweet potatoes, corn, beans, bananas, onions, garlic, vegetables.
Tinha água à vontade para molhar.
There was plenty of water for the land.
Eu vim para aqui, para São Gonçalo.
Then I came here to San Gonçalo. We were moved here by the electricity company. We don't have water here. There is a little that we have to bring from almost 1 league away.
Aqui, o que aconteceu é que nós plantamos, mas Deus...
When we planted crops, God gave us a lot of rain in February.
Acabou-se tudo. Fiquemos tudo
But in
na-
March, April and May, there was no rain at all.
Perdemos tudo que nós...
We are in God's
Não
hands.
teve mantimento de
We
nada.
lost everything in the end. Nobody got anything from the land. We might go 3 or 4 days without any real food, only scraps. It's a miserable situation we're in. We're suffering here in São Gonçalo, in the middle of the Caatinga.
Aqui em São Gonçalo, no centro da Caatinga.
The village of Pau-Ferru, untouched by dams and electricity schemes, sweats its way through the 40-degree heat of late afternoon. Of all the De Silva family's children, it is Carmina who is being groomed for a different kind of life in the future. She goes to school regularly and is pampered with the best set of clothes the family has, and the only luxury in their house, makeup. What does Carmina eventually intend to do?
Quero ir para lugar bem longe, São Paulo.
I want to go far away, to Sao Paulo. I've heard about it on the radio. I think it must be good there. It's a big city, better than here.
Melhor do que aqui. Ela tem vontade de ir para lá porque o tio dela mora lá.
She wants to go there because her uncle lives there. She wants to go there because she thinks it's better than here. All she thinks about is going there. The uncle lives better than us. He works as a driver. He earns real wages. You can't do that here. She thinks life here is bad. We can't give her what she needs here in the countryside. She never stops talking about it.
Morar nos matos, que é o que ela precisava, já não pode dar. Fica falando.
In the last week of August, 6.5 months into the drought, Mrs. De Silva lost another child, her youngest, a baby girl. Malnutrition, contaminated water.
My daughter fell ill, and in 5 days she had a temperature and a cold. She was ill for 5 days, and then she died. She had a very high temperature and a terrible fever, and she died that day. If I had been able to take her to the doctor, I think she would have been saved. I couldn't give her enough vitamins. I didn't expect her to die.
Now, Daytime on 2 visits Brazil for a report on the city of newcomers.
It's only 40 years ago that over 2/3 of the people in Brazil lived in the countryside. For every one Brazilian who grew up in a town, there were 2 who spent their lives on the land. Now, all that has changed. The cities have grown at an alarming rate. This one's called Belo Horizonte. Like many others in Brazil, it's a city of newcomers. Belo Horizonte means beautiful horizon. A fair enough description of the areas where the well-off people live. But beautiful horizon hardly fits the big factory district where most of the city's industries are to be found. A factory job is what people who've moved in from the countryside are ideally looking for. But the wages are rarely enough to pay the rent on a proper home. To find a place to live, the new arrivals move into a district like this. The Brazilians call it a favela. A favela is an area of homemade dwellings. The favelas in Belo Horizonte are growing all the time as new arrivals move in and put up their own homes. The building materials depend on what people can afford. The best favelas are made of bricks and concrete. The worst are nothing more than wooden shacks. This favela is 25 years old. Ten years ago, Mr. and Mrs. Da Silva moved in here from the countryside. Mr. Da Silva is a factory worker. His wife stays home to look after the family.
Mas eu gostei do horário da parte da tarde também, porque no horário da parte da tarde... Eu tinha capaz de já ter voltado,
Inside, their home is spotless. The Da Silvas are very house proud. They have 7 children, by no means unusual in Brazil. Their eldest child, Vera, is 16.
Não pode, sabe? Você tem que...
She's been at work for a year.
Tô quase deixando isso pro VAR. Fazer o VAR dá os negócios.
She and her father often talk about money.
A coisa mais importante é o trabalho.
Between them, they only make just enough to get by.
Mas me deu de lá e eu só tenho que dar tudo.
Like most people in the favela, the Da Silvas are a light-hearted family. But Mr. and Mrs. Da Silva themselves are much more solemn when they talk about their move to the city and the country area they came from.
A nossa vila era uma vida muito humilde, sabe? De gente pobre.
Our life there was very humble. There were poor people with not much education. Then, there was the problem of the big drought.
Passou uns 3 anos quase sem chover, sabe? A lavoura acabou, o gado morreu.
3 years went by almost without any rain. Work on the land stopped, and the cattle died. This was the reason we came to the city, to look for work, so that I could support my family.
Para manter a família.
Foi justamente a seca e os filhos que a gente tinha.
Yes, it was because of the drought and our children. We didn't want them to grow up in the countryside. There were no schools, no comforts. We came here because at least we thought the children would have better opportunities in life. We know it's a bad place, and every day is a bit more of a struggle. But at least our children have had the chance to go to school.
Os filhos na escola, lutando cada dia mais.
And what do they think about the countryside they left behind?
Sente saudade, sabe? Mas não adianta. Causa que já passou.
Of course I miss it. But thinking about it doesn't help. It's all in the past. We're just thinking about what we can do for the children now.
Vamos ver futuramente o que pode fazer agora para as crianças.
The working day in the favela starts early. Vera, the Da Silva's daughter, is up at 6:15. She's been working for 18 months as a seamstress in a small clothing workshop. Vera told us what her working hours are.
E horário de serviço, a gente trabalha de 7 às 7.
I work from 7 till 7. I get an hour for lunch and then a 15-minute coffee break in the afternoon. I go to work 5 days a week, Monday till Friday.
Tchau, Maria. Tchau, Ian.
Vera leaves in the morning with her friend Dudu. They both have jobs in the same workshop. We asked to film inside the place where Vera works, but the owner of the workshop refused and locked us out. Perhaps he didn't want us to know that he only pays the girls £7 for a 55-hour week. Does Vera think these wages are enough for the job she does?
De jeito nenhum.
Eu trabalho demais, sabe? Inclusive, eu tô até ficando meio corcunda.
No way. And I work so hard and spend so long sitting down that I'm getting a bent back. You can't even have a proper conversation. We have to keep quiet while we're working. The boss doesn't like us talking. It's a very cramped place to work in, and the wages are very low.
O salário, o dinheiro tá muito pouco.
Why did Vera give up school then?
Ah, eu tava precisando trabalhar.
Ha! Well, I had to go to work because the family needs my help.
Não tava conseguindo.
There are 7 children, including me. They need things for school, like exercise books, textbooks, pencils, and so on. So I have to help out.
Would it be difficult then to get by just on Vera's father's wages?
It would be. His wages are only, what is it, £8 a week. Even the food bill comes to more than what he earns. So what with electricity bills, water bills, clothes, exercise books, textbooks, pencils, everything like that, the whole thing becomes extremely difficult.
But would Vera have preferred to carry on studying?
Yes, I really would. I was very annoyed to have to leave school because by studying there are lots more things open to you in life. But I had to stop. There was no alternative.
Eu queria fazer curso.
I wanted to do a course, a nursing course, but there was no way I could carry on studying.
Não deu para continuar estudando.
On the main road that runs through Belo Horizonte's factory district, there are other young people from the favela, far worse off than Vera. They spend all day trying to sell things for a few pence. Sometimes it's for pocket money. Mostly it's because their families really need what they can earn. Daily life in the favela is particularly hard for the women. Many homes have neither water nor electricity. For lots of families, water for cooking and washing comes from public taps. Women and girls get very little free time. We asked Vera what she did when she wasn't working at her job.
Quando eu não estou trabalhando, eu trabalho mais.
When I'm not working, I work even more. I mean, when I'm not actually doing the job you're talking about, I'm washing clothes, ironing, and cleaning the house. I help out with everything around the house.
But what do people do with the odd spare moment during the day?
Aqui que eles falam muito, toda hora.
People here love talking. Any moment they get, they'll stop and have a chat. Usually, though, when they start a conversation, they get round to talking about money. One will say, I haven't got the money to buy milk for my child. Another will say, I wanted to go to town today, but I didn't have enough for the bus fare.
So what about entertainment for young people in the favela? Is there any?
Não tem. Aqui não.
There isn't any. Not here.
An occasional Saturday morning trip to the city centre is something that Vera and her friend Dudu look forward to.
How much are these sandals?
£4.
That's expensive.
O que você acha de sandália?
What do you think?
Muito mole, nossa.
Very fashionable, aren't they?
Para vocês. Mas normalmente essa aqui é uma das melhores que nós temos.
But when it rains, your feet get soaked.
Não. Isso aqui provavelmente a gente usa Então, moça...
They both know that at £4, the sandals are way beyond Vera's means. As Vera says, they're nice, but everything's so expensive. So what has the growth of Belo Horizonte meant for the thousands of ordinary people who've moved in from the countryside to work there? For Vera, it has meant going to school, but then getting stuck with a tough job. Like other young people in the favela, she's not optimistic about the future.
I don't think I'll ever get a chance to move out of the favela. Most people here don't get the opportunity to study properly for a good job. That's the position I'm in. So, I'm going to concentrate on getting on well with the people I know. The people who live around me.
Vambora. Principalmente a borboleta amarela. Principalmente a borboleta amarela. E a borboleta se pôs a pensar. Pensa que pensa. Quanto de... Não. Repensa que pensa.
On the very edge of the city, yet more favelas are being built as people still come in from the countryside. Are the children of the latest arrivals going to do any better? All over Brazil, the same story continues. Come to the city, look for work, find a piece of land, build your own home, and hope for the best. In this way, the city spreads even farther outwards, another area of dusty roads and homes with few home comforts. Since Vera's family came to Belo Horizonte, they have always had to face the problem of a large family living on low wages. This problem is going to be even worse for the families who are still arriving, because the cost of living is rising all the time. It's a problem to which the city has no answer.
Daytime on 2 continues now with a look at the economic development of Brazil.
Halfway through the afternoon, the sky darkens, and Brazil's Amazon region is due for one of its regular tropical downpours. The storms may last no more than half an hour, but within that short time, the land has been drenched with an enormous amount of rainfall. For many months in the year, the coming and going of tropical storms is a regular daily event. One of the largest areas of natural vegetation left in the world thrives in this hot and humid atmosphere. The tropical rainforest. Nearly half the world's tropical rainforest is in Brazil. It covers 3 million square kilometers of the country. That's over 20 times the size of England. Until recently, the only way into the Amazon region was by river, and the river banks were where most of the people lived. Away from... About 10 years ago, Brazil launched a massive road building program in the Amazon. It was part of a scheme, almost a dream, to open up the rainforest. It was predicted that 10 million people would come and settle along the new roads, that the roads would be bustling with traffic carrying new industrial and agricultural products. In the event, nothing as grand as that has happened. There have been some successes, but many failures too. The dream of setting up new developments in the forest didn't quite work out as planned. Today, the nearest things to bustling traffic are the roadside stops built 100 kilometers apart along the highways. The lorry drivers' big talking points are the problems of keeping their vehicles in shape, road conditions, and the distances they travel. Pedro Ferreira covers about 200,000 kilometers a year and knows well the problems of driving a lorry around the Amazon.
Muitos problemas é que a gente atola demais, né? Quando chove é muito penoso.
There are many problems here. When it rains a lot, the roads become very dangerous. Vehicles start skidding, and when the mud gets thick, your wheels won't hold the road. Drivers have a lot to put up with. It's not unusual for vehicles to get stuck for 20 or 30 days in the middle of nowhere. I've been driving in the Amazon for 4 years, and my worst experience was last year, when there was very heavy rain. On one trip, I got stranded so often that I spent a total of 46 days away from home. When the weather's dry, you get the problem of potholes and lots of dust.
Acaba tudo, né? Porque de tanto bater em buraco, bate para cima, bate para lá, né?
The lorry takes a lot of punishment. There are so many holes, it gets bashed about all over the place. My firm's lorries last about 10 years. They have a very strict maintenance program. But it costs a lot to keep them on the road. If a driver doesn't know what he's doing, a lorry won't even last for a year.
Aqui tem muitos exemplos aí que pode perguntar.
Just ask around. There are lots of cases like that here.
As the road pushed deeper into the Amazon, the government started to open up land for agriculture. The idea was to offer peasant farmers a new home and a chance to make a new start in a pioneer area. The scheme, however, was badly organized, and the living conditions for most people today are a far cry from the new start they had expected. The number of settlers still living by the roadside is only a fraction of what was originally planned. This government house belongs to a couple who came from Rio Grande do Sul in the south of Brazil, 4,000 kilometers away. They came with high hopes of making a go of farming in the Amazon. When they arrived, they found things to be quite different from what they had expected. It's a move they have regretted ever since.
Então, nós se dirigimos para cá. Está fazendo
We came here, when was it?
8 anos.
8 years ago.
Aí, nós vendemos tudo que tinha, botamos fora, né?
We sold up everything we had in order to move here.
9 cabeças de gado.
We had 9 head of cattle and 10 hectares of land.
Hectares de terra.
We heard about this Amazon project on the radio. They said there'd be a house with land and services to help you.
But when they arrived, nothing was ready for them. They had to live in a shack by the roadside for 2 years before they finally got the government house they live in now.
Deixa devagarzinho que assim. Quantas xícaras?
What did they find when they first arrived?
Mato, só mato.
Só mato.
E essa estrada transamazônica, só.
Forest. Just forest. When we came here, there was nothing but forest. That was all. And the Trans-Amazon Road out there. There was no water, and we were thirsty when we arrived. After a few hours, we heard the sound of a spring. Thank God we managed to find the water.
Achamos água, né? Ai, graças a Deus, conseguimos água, né? Mas nós tínhamos que comprar o alimento.
When we needed to buy food, we had to ride on a government lorry to Itaituba, 150 kilometers away. We'd received some government money to buy the food. If it hadn't been for that, I think I myself would have died from hunger.
Ainda deu para quebrar galho, porque se não fosse daquilo, eu mesmo tinha morrido de fome. Tinha morrido de fome.
Have they ever had the chance to go back home during the 8 years they've spent in the Amazon?
Ainda não. Não tivemos condição de voltar.
No, not yet.
Faz pouco, não temos condição.
We make so little that we don't have the means to go back home. The land here is so poor that you can't make any money out of it. Me and my wife want to go back home to Rio Grande do Sul.
Nós podemos até voltar para o Rio Grande do Sul, né? Eu com a minha esposa.
They still can't afford the bus fare home. 2 tickets would cost them £80. Not everybody came as a result of the government scheme that was supposed to be such a money-making concern. Many came of their own accord as a way of escaping from the poverty of the northeast, Brazil's poorest region. At many spots along the Trans-Amazon roads, the northeasterners have cleared the forest, started farming, and put up their own homes. This house belongs to Mr. and Mrs. Netu. Their story is typical of many people from the northeast now living in the Amazon.
O primeiro no ano que eu saí de lá foi seco. Não choveu, eu perdi a roça todinha.
They told us they first left the northeast when a drought killed off all their crops in 1951. Since then, they've lived in half a dozen different places trying to make a living before setting up home here in the Amazon.
Tava tudo em mata ainda. Só tinha essa estrada aqui.
They said that when they arrived, all there was the forest and the road. They cleared the land themselves and built a small shed with an oven inside where they make flour from a vegetable they grow called manioc. They don't think the soil's very good, but with the manioc and rice as their basic diet, they can meet their everyday needs. A few years ago, their children's family joined them and built a house a short distance down the road. Now, they said, they were simply looking forward to spending the rest of their days here, close to their family. There are other activities in the forest that have proved more rewarding than farming. Some of the world's richest deposits of minerals have been discovered in the Amazon. This is a new mine that has opened up a deposit of high-quality bauxite, the raw material for making aluminium. It was discovered near the Trombetas River, well into the heart of the Amazon, over 1,000 kilometers from the coast. Every piece of equipment, from the smallest screw to the heaviest machine, had to be shipped in by river. The people who work here, as on any new project in the Amazon, come from all over Brazil.
Vai aparecer no Brasil todo hoje.
The high cost of setting up the mine and building homes for 3,000 people was paid for by one Brazilian company and 5 foreign firms. The great attraction to invest in the project was the money to be made. The mine will soon be producing 8 million tons of bauxite a year and could go on for at least 65 years. To get the bauxite from the mine to the nearest river, a 30-kilometer stretch of railway line had to be built through the rainforest. At present, the trains bring down 9,000 tons of bauxite a day from the mine to the unloading point near the river. The bauxite is taken to the river, where it's picked up and exported once a week by ship. About half the profits from this valuable discovery are taken by the foreign companies who put money into the project. The rest, a question of several million pounds a year, is taken by Brazil. The rainforest, once it's been cut down, never entirely grows back into its original state. But in the case of mining, a relatively small area of destruction brings in large amounts of money from minerals. The value of other developments we've seen is much more questionable. For long periods of time, the Trans-Amazon roads are empty of traffic. They were never properly finished anyway. It proved too expensive to surface them. And there are many weak links that will now never be made good. To maintain the roads costs a fortune. Imagine the fuel bill alone for this repair work on the damage done by the heavy tropical rains. The biggest mistake, however, was to think that the forest could be turned into productive farmland. The thick vegetation suggests that the soil is very fertile. But in fact, the rainforest vegetation is extremely fragile. Every plant, every raindrop, has a part to play in keeping the earth below fertile. Clearing the forest to make will have all gone in 50 years from now.
BBC Two, and we continue now the series on Brazil.
This used to be probably the most important annual event for the whole Brazilian economy. Bags of coffee beans being removed from the big coffee estates at harvest time. coffee still is one of Brazil's major products. The first berries are ready for picking in June, the beginning of winter in southeast Brazil. A lot of the work is done by agricultural laborers and their families, who live all year round on the big coffee estates. Until about 20 years ago, Brazil was typical of most developing countries in that its major export was an unprocessed raw material, coffee beans. It was typical of most other developing countries in another respect too. Over half the population of Brazil were employed in agriculture and lived on the land. But that was 20 years ago. Since then, as you will know from previous films in this series, Brazil has thrown itself into a fast and furious development program. This rush to modernize has had two important results. The majority of people now live in urban rather than rural areas. And manufacturing industry has taken over from coffee as the country's main source of wealth. In parts of the big cities, there is little feeling of being in a developing country at all. It could be Europe or North America. Obviously, there are some people who are getting a share of this new Brazil. The question is, what are the rest getting from Brazilian-style development? To move closer to an answer, we went to two places. A new car factory in Belo Horizonte, in the southern industrial region, and an area in the northeast where the cultivation of sugarcane is being increased under an important new government program. Two places then, one industrial, one agricultural, both closely tied up with the way Brazil is developing at this very moment. Belo Horizonte's factory district is exactly what Brazilian-style development is all about. A manufacturing complex based on Brazilian manpower and investment from foreign companies. The new car factory was set up and funded in conjunction with an Italian car manufacturer. It's the showpiece of the city's new industries. At first sight, it's tempting to see nothing but progress here. The factory itself has created 10,000 new jobs. The steel plate used for the car bodies is made locally, thereby creating even more jobs in the region's iron and steel industry. Thanks to the factory, more men now have new industrial skills. The company says that all its employees get fringe benefits like medical care and subsidized housing. The cars are selling well in Brazil and will shortly be exported too. You would think then that these are the people whose standard of living must really be benefiting from Brazilian-style progress. You don't have to go very far from the car plant before you begin to change your mind. This is the sort of area the city's new industrial workforce lives in, including workers at the car factory. Development may boast new industries, but it rarely includes a decent place to live for the people who work in them. It's the usual Brazilian story. Move from the countryside to work in the city, then build your own home on any piece of land you can find. More often than not, there will be no running water, no proper drainage, and no electricity. Alberto dos Santos is one of the residents of this new area of homemade houses. He works at the car plant and is still finishing off the house he built himself. Like thousands of others, Alberto and his wife moved here from the countryside, where work on the land was tough and badly paid. We asked Alberto why he lives here rather than in a proper home.
The reason is that I can't afford to pay rent. There's no way I can pay rent and look after my family properly. If I had to pay rent, my family would have to go without basic necessities.
How did he go about building his house?
I built it with the help of some mates who work as bricklayers, because I haven't got much idea about that kind of work. We worked on Sundays, when we were free from our jobs. That's how everybody does it. One Sunday you do a bit, the next Sunday a bit more.
Alberto and his wife have only 3 children, a small family for Brazil. So with Alberto's job at the car plant, no rent to pay, and only 3 children, they should be doing well. But is the money Alberto makes enough to get by without worrying about everyday needs?
No, sinceramente, muito pouco. No, honestly not. It's very little. You go to work, and all the time you're waiting for payday on the 10th of the month. But most times you already know that it won't be enough to pay off your debts. By the grace of God, we somehow get by. For example, one day I can afford meat. The next day I can't. Another day the gas runs out and I have to go and borrow money from a mate to buy more. So I think the wages are very low. They're no good.
We mentioned to Alberto the houses the car company says are available to all their employees. They're partly subsidized by the car firm. Why hadn't he applied for one?
As far as I'm concerned, I don't know anything about that. They never mentioned it to me.
Does Alberto know of anyone in his section of the plant who managed to get a house?
No. Da minha seção, no. No, not in my section.
And that is hardly surprising. The homes are for staff earning at least twice as much as Alberto. They're beyond the means of an assembly line worker.
Deus te acompanhe.
Amém. Fique com Deus também. Hoje, tchau.
Tchau. Vai com Deus também.
Amém.
Bom serviço.
Obrigado.
Even here, not far from a brand new car plant, it seems perfectly normal that factory workers should live in an unplanned, untidy area, unable to afford a proper home. Brazil's plans to modernize and industrialize roll relentlessly onwards. Practically without exception, Brazilian development is modern in its technology and large in its operation and scale. Only the biggest and the best will do. This progress continues, no matter what the cost. But this kind of progress has come up against a barrier. Brazil has become dangerously dependent on oil, the only important mineral it has very little of. To tackle this problem, the government has started a scheme to replace some of the country's petrol supplies with alcohol. Not the drinking kind, but an industrial alcohol made from sugarcane. Thousands of cars already have alcohol engines. In a few years, the aim is to have enough to cut Brazil's oil requirements by half. Sugarcane is grown in many parts of Brazil. But it's in the northeast that it has been grown for longer than anywhere else, ever since Portuguese colonial times. Now, in the northeast's sugarcane landscape, there are brand new landmarks. The distillation plants built to produce alcohol for the government program. For the owners of the sugar estates, the increase in alcohol production has been the biggest boost to their business for many years. At harvest time, the sugar mills are taking in all the cane they can get. With sugar cane now at the center of one of Brazil's most vital development programs, the benefits must surely be felt not only by the estate owners, but by the people who work in the cane fields too. Or is that quite the way things are? Murupé is a small village in the sugarcane growing area of northeast Brazil. Practically everybody here works on the big sugar estates in the surrounding area. The villagers have no other major source of income, and that's the way things have always been for the past 200 years. Now, with the planting of even more sugarcane for the alcohol program, Murupé's dependence on this one crop is unlikely to change. José de Andrade has been a laborer in the cane fields since he was 12. He has never known any other kind of work. 5 or 6 days a week of back-breaking work is the only way José can support his family.
Saio às 6 da manhã, chego às 6 da noite, 7.
I leave home at 6 in the morning and come back at 6, 7 in the evening. I spend all day cutting and cleaning the cane. When the wife knows where we're working, she brings lunch to us. When she doesn't, we work all day without lunch. Working on a sugar plantation wears you out. You become weaker and weaker all the time. You feel bad. You perspire a lot.
A roupa molha todinha de suor.
Your clothes get covered in sweat. You feel weak. The heat, the dust. You don't earn enough to feed your children the way they deserve.
Do jeito que é, né? Do jeito que o filho merece, né? Eu acho muito ruim, né?
I think my job's awful.
Trabalhar no serviço mais maneiro.
What I'd really like to do is work in the building industry.
Na sombra, né?
Then why can't José get a job like that?
Leitura que eu não tenho.
I haven't got the education.
Sinto muito não ter leitura aí.
I regret not having the education. That's why.
What does José think of the money he makes working in the fields?
A gente acha que a gente trabalha mais de graça do que...
We think we work for nothing. They don't pay the money we deserve. If we got paid in line with what they get from selling the cane, things would be different. We could feed ourselves better then.
And how much does José make?
By the end of the week, £8, £6.50.
Yes.
Something like that.
José's money buys only the most basic diet for himself and his family. There are 30 million other Brazilians like them, a quarter of the population, mostly rural dwellers, living at subsistence level. For them, progress may be seen, but not enjoyed. In the cities, industrial development has been unable to keep up with the need for more employment. 35% of Brazilians who could be doing a real job still don't have one. Those who do have only the most basic standard of living and may very seldom be able to buy the product they are helping to make. The real benefits of Brazil's economic progress have been felt by a very small part of the population, 10 million or so people who were already well off and are now richer still. The rest of Brazil's 120 million people are waiting for their fair share.